Let's talk now with Tucker Carlson, the host of Tucker Carlson Tonight here on the Fox News Channel. Your memories of Charles, Tucker.
Well, I mean, kind of the defining fact of Charles, I think, for most people who watched him on television, and for those of us who talk for a living, was just the window pane clarity of his thinking and his writing and his speaking. There was no mistaking what he meant. He argued almost always wholly on the level of principle. It was never personal. You can't imagine Charles ever being savagely cruel or mocking someone's appearance or going low. It was always about the ideas. And he explained it in a way that even if you disagreed, you could understand his reasoning. And that kind of, in a way, diffused the conflict with Charles. In other words, you can't imagine anybody getting into a screaming match with Charles, even people who deeply disagreed with him, because his humanity was clear. It was obvious that he had no weird agenda. It was all right up front. And it was obvious that he thought about it. I mean, these were not sort of, things that he arrived at randomly or, tics. I mean, these were, his positions were the result of a lot of deep thinking. Anyway, Charles was just an impressive person. I would say personally, as someone who knew him for more than 20 years, I was always, and I don't know if this ever came out on television, but I was always really taken by his sense of humor. Charles was hilarious. Mm-hmm. He saw the deep absurdity of life. He appreciated irony. But he also had a lighter sense of humor. And in the makeup room, which obviously, having spent your life in television, you know well, is this kind of sanctum in TV. It's the one place you can say whatever you want. You can be fully yourself. There's this unspoken rule that what's said there doesn't leave there. And so people really are the way they really are in the makeup room. And when Charles was in the makeup room, nobody talked. People listened. He commanded that room more completely and more effortlessly than anyone I've ever seen. And it was a combination of the fact that people just respected him so much. He didn't have a booming voice. You had to listen to hear what he was saying. But also it was a reflection of the fact that he was genuinely hilarious. He was just a very funny guy in a sweet way. And rarely do you meet someone who's a riot, but at no one's expense. Mm-hmm. That I can't overstate his personal decency. That's real. And
as you said at the top of this, Tucker, he had a way of cutting through the clutter with sort of a lightning bolt clarity, where you would listen to what Charles had to say about a particular topic, and you would say, now I get it.
Yes, and even if you didn't agree with it. I mean, what's so interesting, just to give an example, and I think you may have just talked to Brett about this, Charles was not in favor of the president getting the Republican nomination. I don't know how he felt about him getting elected president, but he was not a fan of Trump's. And, for all of the kind of hostile back and forth the president has had with journalists, he seemed to be able to take that from Charles. I mean, which is to say, even people who Charles criticized could kind of understand what he was saying, and they didn't take it as personally because he didn't mean it personally. Because, again, there was no rage or animus or weird agenda animating it. He just had these ideas, or they were very clear about what they were, and so you didn't have to be offended if you disagreed with him. It's a rare talent and a wonderful talent.
One of the things that you and Charles really shared, Tucker, was a love for baseball.
What we shared really in real life was a love of dogs. Charles was a great dog lover and a former border collie owner, and just given his injury, there were times in his life where dogs had actually played a role in helping, and so he had a deep appreciation of them. And I'm a dog lover too, and so we spent an awful lot of time talking about that. And without sounding macabre, but it's just true. The other thing we talked about quite a bit actually, was death. Charles had spent a lot of time thinking about it, simply because of that experience he had had as a young man at Harvard Medical School, where he thought he was going to die when he was at the bottom of that pool. And I always thought that the root of his cheerfulness was the fact that he had looked this square in the face and come to terms with it, as we all must, but so few of us actually do. We're going to die. Charles knew that in a way that almost nobody I've ever met did. And it sounds like the kind of thing that would make him morose, but it had just the opposite effect. There was a lightness to Charles that came from it, and it was beautiful to watch, I thought.
Let me just back up to baseball and then add in dogs. And if I could, Tucker, just tell a story that I think really kind of illuminates the sort of person that Charles Krauthammer was. Charles has an abiding love, or had an abiding love, for baseball. Most nights in the summer, he was out there at Nationals Park to watch the game, and he wanted, the one thing that he wanted to be able to do was teach his son how to play baseball. And so he got a dog, and he taught the dog how to retrieve a tennis ball. And then he had the guy who cuts his lawn mark out in his back lawn of his place just north of Washington a rough baseball diamond. And then he had somebody fashion, because as we've seen in these pictures, he had some limited use of his right hand, something that he could put the tennis ball on the end of and toss it. So what he did was he went out there a little bit in front of the home plate, and he had his son there with the bat, and he had the dog who was at his side ready to go, and he would get the tennis ball and put it in that little device. He would toss it across the plate. His son would take a swing at it, and if he hit it, the dog would run out and retrieve the ball and bring it back and drop it in Charles's lap. And that was the way that a man who was paralyzed from the neck down could teach his son how to play baseball. Tucker, thanks so much. And I know you're going to have more on this tonight at 8 o'clock. We really appreciate it.